Well, hello. I'd like to welcome you to Community Christian Church. My name is Nick Cox, and I'm glad to be here today. Allow me to introduce myself if we haven't had a chance to meet before, so you have an idea of who I am, my background, my training, all that good stuff. I grew up right down the road in Hamilton, so I'm local, I'm married, and we'll be married for 16 years coming up in August. I have 3 kids, 11, almost 9, and 6. We're actually just getting back into rolling through the busyness of life after being grounded for about a year. I went to the University of Maryland for my undergrad, so go Terps. I have 2 master's degrees, one from a little school in Tennessee and with a degree called a Master's of Divinity, which is a super pretentious sounding degree. It's almost like Masters of the Universe or something like that, but it's mostly just a degree in Christian religious studies. I have a second master's degree from Messiah College up in Pennsylvania, and that's in marriage and family counseling. I am a licensed clinical marriage and family therapist, and my day job is to work with individuals and families and couples and help them be as healthy as possible and have relationships that are as healthy as possible. I've been doing that for about 10 years now. I was on staff here at CCC for about 7 years before leaving to do counseling full time. Now, I know over the last few weeks, we've been gathering some questions that people have sent in to discuss for today. Now, a couple of caveats before we get started. First of all, there was a decent number of questions that came in, and I'm not going to be able to address all of them. Partly is because of the timing. Partly is because some of these questions are a little bit more personal in nature, and they don't work really well for a setting like this. So I've condensed some of the questions down. I've combined some things together so that they could really make sure that it makes sense for how we're going to be talking over this. But if you have a question and you were really hoping for it to get addressed, please reach out. Secondly, I'm not offering medical advice or mental health advice. I'm not your therapist. This is not the setting for a therapeutic intervention or a confidential conversation. I don't know what's happening in your life. I don't know what circumstances you're going through. What I do hope is to offer a different perspective of some common questions or concerns or problems that people struggle with in their lives, especially for people who put their faith in Jesus as a significant portion of how they're living their life. Thirdly, my answers are going to be, by necessity, pretty broad and pretty general and pretty brief. I could easily go on, and I have before, for hours on each of these questions, but we'll keep it a bit shorter for today. Lastly, I want to make it crystal clear that I struggle with all these things as much as anyone. I'm not pretending that I got this all solved. I am a hypocrite, and I don't always take my own advice, and I'm attempting to grow and develop, and I hope that you attempt to grow and develop as well. So, without further ado, let's jump on in. Here's the first question we're going to dive into today. How do you balance faith and science when it comes to mental and emotional health? Now, I know there are a lot of different perspectives that people have when it comes to therapy and counseling, and there can be some people, especially in the church, if we're being honest, that take a dim view on mental health counseling. There are some people for whom the general idea is God will handle it all. There's never a need to see a therapist or a counselor. There's never a need for medication, never a need for anything other than just faith. Now look, I am pro-faith. I'm all for it. I believe God can do powerful and amazing things in people's lives. But I think that, unfortunately, many people have received the message that if they need help, it means their faith is somehow lacking or too weak. There's a lot of shame that can be tossed around, and it can be a significant barrier when it comes to people taking next steps when they need it. It's interesting how differently we tend to view the mental health part of the world and the physical health part of the world. Because the mental and emotional aspect of our lives, we have a much stronger tendency to view an illness or a struggle as some kind of moral failing or spiritual weakness. If someone struggles with anxiety, if someone's dealing with a deep depression, if someone is grieving, we can sometimes place upon that person a sense that they are somehow spiritually flawed or weak or broken. Now imagine that someone breaks their arm. How often do we think, man, you see Ann over there? She broke her arm. Well, but I thought she was a Christian. I don't know. We don't ever do that, do we? If someone's body doesn't produce insulin, if their blood pressure creeps up, if they have a food allergy, we don't tend to view these as moral or spiritual barometers about how they're doing. And we certainly don't tend to react in the same way when it comes to treatment or help with regard to mental health stuff, the same way we do with physical health. Again, imagine the same scenario. Poor Ann with her broken arm. How long would it be wise for Ann to try to fix that herself? How long would it be wise for Ann to pretend like everything is just fine and keep on living, even though her arm is just dangling at her side? How much sense would it be for her to listen to these well-meaning but misguided friends tell her, if only her faith was stronger, if only she prayed more, if only she read her Bible more, then I'm sure her arm would just fix itself and she'll get over it? Of course not. Could you imagine someone trying to shrug off a broken arm without a cast or without a doctor, without the resources they would need to help heal? But with the mental and emotional part of the world, people look at it very differently. And for people of faith, for followers of God, the concept of I did it and God did it is a false dichotomy. It's not one or the other. It has always been God working through us, God working in us, God working alongside us, God using us as his hands and feet as he uses us to do his work. The idea that it is either all God or all in our own efforts, that's not how it works, and it never has been. The story of the Bible is a story of God interacting with people, not just the actions of God, but the action of God alongside of and inside of people. Now, of course, the opposite view of this is akin to losing your job and just trusting God's going to give you a new job. So you don't apply for a new job. You don't look for a new job. You don't lean into your network. You just trust God's going to plop a job right into my lap and I don't have to lift a finger. Well, that's not how it works. The other extreme, of course, is leaving God out of it, never praying about it, never asking what God wants from you for this new job, never chasing what God wants, but just chasing what you want. And both extremes will not work for a person who is trying to follow God. So the idea of taking medication or speaking to a therapist or working with a doctor as somehow being a diminishment of God's work or a diminishment of God's involvement, I just don't think that's the case. Why did God use Moses to free the people from Egypt? Why not just free them himself? Why did God use Peter to speak and teach about him instead of speaking through a cloud of fire or some other supernatural means? God has always worked with, through, and in people. And that includes doctors and therapists and scientists and teachers. All right, next question. This has been a really difficult and stressful year. But even as things are starting to open up again, I find my anxiety and fears feel intense at times. How do I deal with my anxieties and fears? I hear you. There are so many different fears and anxiety that chase us down. And this year, it feels like, man, they just kind of moved in like an unwelcome house guest. And for many people, what happens is that the stresses of their lives and the fears of their lives, it just kind of gobbles them up. And one of the essential parts of getting healthy in any realm of our lives is to have a healthy sense of self-awareness. We need to know what's going on inside of us. And it's amazing how many people lack a real deep sense of what they are thinking and what they are feeling. But man, it matters so much that we know what's going on inside of us. And an early step with someone who is struggling with anxiety often comes down to this level of self-awareness of where their focus tends to shift toward. One of the exercises I sometimes give people is a journaling exercise. And the question really just comes down to is you're essentially making a journal with two categories. And when it comes to anxiety, it's what can I control and what can't I control? For a lot of people, anxiety comes down to stress and struggle and strain of trying to grip and grab and grasp things that you have absolutely no power over, no control over. But the challenge that often happens with people is that they kind of get their wires crossed when it comes to where they're putting their focus. Because when you spend your energy on things you can't control, you won't have energy or time left over for the things you can control. Now, for example, let's imagine that there's a woman who is in a really terrible work situation. It's just a mess, lots of conflict, boss is kind of a jerk, really super critical. Can she control what her boss says to her? Can she control if her coworkers get along with each other? Can she control if she gets passed over for a promotion? Can she control what other people think about her or how they speak to her? No, she doesn't have any control over all of this. Now let's pretend that this woman was a part of a small group, but since her work started getting really stressful, she hasn't really been going. And she hasn't really been going for walks like she used to, even though that was something that was really helpful before. And she hasn't been reading her Bible. She just finds herself distracted. And her best friends, she used to meet with her every week and they haven't really connected recently. Does she have control over those things? She absolutely does, each and every one of them. But the more time and energy and headspace she spends on what she cannot control, the less she'll have available for the things she can control. And here's where writing this stuff down comes in. So with regard to your anxieties, what can you control and what can't you? And then here's the response. How am I responding to with what's in my reach? And how am I doing releasing these things to God? The things we can control that we have some say over, how am I doing responding to those things? The things that aren't mine and never were and never will be in my control, how am I doing releasing those things to God? You see, this shift in perspective, it allows us to attempt to address what's going on inside of us in a much more significant way. There's a part of the Bible where Jesus is talking specifically about anxieties and troubles and all these things that we're talking about. And this is what he says in Matthew 6. Therefore, do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. Right? The idea is that we have no control over tomorrow. We don't have any say over what tomorrow is going to bring. We don't have any say over what tomorrow is. It's outside of our control. Tomorrow will worry for itself. Let's make sure we're spending our energy on things we can control. And there are some people who try to control everything around them, and they get anxious because there are things they can never and could never be able to control. Whether or not your kid gets sick, whether or not your spouse makes a terrible choice, whether or not you're offered the new job, these are not yours to control. It doesn't matter where you are in your life. The ability to know how to manage these things inside of yourself, it is a vital skill. Whether you're a CEO or a sixth grader just trying to make it through the week, you need to know the extent of which you are controlling what is yours and the extent to which you're releasing these things to God. And see, when we ask these questions well, then we put ourselves in a position to continue to grow with what is God calling us to act on? Where is God calling us to take actions and next steps alongside of Him? Where is God calling us to release things to Him? All right, next question. What is the right balance between caring for people and loving people sacrificially and appropriate self-care? This is a great question. It's one I see people struggling with on a regular basis. There have been a lot of people who've grown up in a Christian setting, and they've been taught that the Christian life means a constant pouring out of themselves, and that any amount of self-care is selfish or inappropriate. And some people carry around a lot of guilt when it comes to this part of their lives, that if they're not constantly serving someone else, if they're not constantly taking care of somebody else, then they're somehow being selfish. Now, one of the core verses of the Bible, it's one I bet you know even if you've never been to church before. There was a time when Jesus was teaching about what the core of the Bible is all about. Like, what is this significance of the Bible? Can you sum it all up for us? And this is what Jesus says to kind of sum up all of the Bible for us. Jesus says this in Mark 12. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. Right? It's this idea, this sum up of the whole Bible. What does it mean? What is it all about? Love God, love Him significantly with all your heart and all your soul, and love people like you love yourself. But what this verse means, if we're slowing down enough to think about it, is that there must be an appropriate way to love ourselves. Otherwise, this verse doesn't mean anything. The simple truth is there are some people who actually treat others better than they treat themselves. For a lot of people, the way they talk to themselves, that running internal monologue, the way they react to themselves, the way they treat themselves is far worse than they treat anyone else. Except here's the real key. You can't give away what you don't have. If my son came to me and he asked me for $1 million, he could hold his breath till he is blue in the face. I don't have it. Even if I wanted to give him $1 million, which I do not, I couldn't do it. I can only give away what I have. So if you want to give away healthy to your kids, if you want to give away healthy to your spouse or your friends, if you want to serve and care for people, you cannot give away what you don't have. Here's the reality of it. There are times when you'll be deeply ineffective as a servant. You'll be compromised as a parent or spouse. You'll be ineffective in giving away healthy to anyone in your world unless you have it in you. And there's a question I ask people sometimes, and being completely honest, moms do not always have a great answer for this question. And it's this. What do you do simply because it is healthy for you? Not because you had to do it along the way, not because it's a task you had to complete, not because someone else made you do it or wanted you to do it. What do you do simply because it makes you a healthier version of yourself? So maybe you need to slow down and ask that question of yourself as well. What do you do simply because it's healthy for you? All right, next question. What's one step we can take to strengthen our marriage relationship? I've sat across from a lot of couples over the years, and every now and then a couple will ask a question and they don't say it directly. They kind of get that it's not the kind of thing you should ask directly, but they kind of imply, hey, how do we get some really quick progress? Like, how do we get this thing rolling so we can get some results really, really quick? And they know you don't say it out loud, but you definitely get the sense of it. And I answer it the same way every time when someone says that, really hoping for some quick results. The answer is this. If you want to quickly produce a significant positive impact in your relationship, the area I suggest people start is to increase the expressions of thankfulness, appreciation, and encouragement. There are so many things we can't control in our lives and our relationships, but the attitude we bring into our relationships, the way we manage the energy of our environment, it's absolutely one of them. And the simple truth is this. I have never met someone who said to me, my spouse is just too encouraging. Man, I wish they would knock it off. I am completely full of encouragement, appreciation. I just don't need any more. Of course not. We leak it, don't we? The world beats it out of us and life grinds it out of us, and the struggle and the fatigue and being weary. If we're not careful, we just kind of run dry. My wife and I, we moved about 3 years ago, and I have to be honest with you, and this is one of those signs like I'm getting older a little bit. There was a part that I was really excited about moving was I had to buy a riding mower. Right? I never had a riding mower before, always had the push mower variety, and I was so excited to be able to change into the riding mower world. And I've always been kind of a frugal person, so I enjoy haggling. I found one on Craigslist I like. I was able to haggle them down a little bit, and I had this used Cub Cadet mower, and it was awesome. And now one of the features I came to learn the hard way, unfortunately, this particular riding mower has this little valve on the side of it, and it's made to drain the oil out of the engine for when you're changing the oil. The idea is it's supposed to make it easier to do the maintenance. Turns out, though, that the valve is right on the side of the mower, right by where your foot goes. Now, I'm not exactly sure how it happens. I don't know if I hit a rock or a stick. I don't know if my foot hit it. Who knows? But after 2 years of faithful service, in the middle of mowing the lawn, that valve got hit. And without realizing it, oil was leaking out of the mower. And about a third of the way through the yard, the motor seized up and it grinded to a halt. Because you see, the mower engine, it can't run without the oil. The friction, it's too much, and the heat starts to build up and the parts start grinding together, and then things start shutting down. Relationships are the exact same way when it comes to appreciation and gratitude and encouragement. They can run for a little while without it, but then the friction of life, it starts to wear and the heat begins to grow, and give it some time and it just grinds to a halt. The Bible talks about it this way in the book of Hebrews. I love this verse in Hebrews 3. But encourage one another day after day, as long as it is still called today, so that none of you will be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. Day after day after day. I love the phrasing of that because it's this idea of over and over and over again of offering that encouragement to each other. So the challenge I offer couples is to express one specific, genuine gratitude, appreciation, or encouragement to each other each day. And I know it's not exactly setting the bar super high, but you got to start somewhere. And the reality is there's so many people in our world that need that kind of encouragement. They're running dry on it. Did you know that pretty much every mom I've ever met struggles to believe that they're a good mom? That they have moments when they significantly doubt their ability to be a mom? Did you know that most men that I've talked to struggle with feeling like they're providing for their family really, really well? Did you know that most kids at one time or another will struggle with feeling loved, feeling cared for, feeling like they're good enough at different points? So what would it look like for you to express appreciation, gratitude, and encouragement within your relationships? How amazing would it be if your household was characterized this? If your relationship was constantly offering and receiving encouragement? If your kids grew up watching this modeled for them? What an amazing environment for everyone to grow up in. All right, next question. What are things to keep an eye on to make sure I don't drift into being mentally or emotionally unhealthy? In other words, are there ways I could be moving toward being unhealthy and not realize it? The short answer to the question, if people can drift into being unhealthy without realizing it, is absolutely yes. I'd actually venture to say that it's the way it normally works for most people. Very rarely do people take flying leaps into being unhealthy. Normally it's just small step after small step after small step to where you're not where you want to be anymore. There's a verse in the Bible in 2 Corinthians that I really use a lot because I think it really speaks to what does it look like to know yourself well. And it says this: examine yourself to see whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves. And yet, for a whole lot of us, we don't like testing ourselves to see where we are, but we need to because we need to know if we're headed in the right direction. We need to know if we're moving in the direction we've decided. I think there's 3 main areas that people need to look at to make sure they're moving in the right direction. It's almost like a self-audit, if you will. Now, if you're taking an audit of something, it's not always a comfortable experience, but it's an essential one. And here's the 3 areas that I'm going to really encourage you to kind of ask some questions of yourself in. How am I spending my time? How am I spending my money? How am I spending my energy? Our time, money, and energy are, broadly speaking, the way we spend our lives. And what they represent are our priorities. Whatever we spend our time on, our money on, our energy on, it represents what matters most to us. If I was talking to someone and they say, man, I love boating. Oh man, I'm a big fan of boats. I love boats. I'm a huge fan of it. Oh, okay. So, man, do you spend a lot of time out in the water? No, not really. I mean, I haven't been able to shake free and get out there for a while. So, okay. Well, so do you have a boat? Oh, no. I wouldn't spend money on something like that. So do you go to boat shows? Or I don't know, do you watch boat videos or something like that? No, not really. You see, that person doesn't love boating. They love the idea of boating. The person loves the concept of boating. But if they're unable or unwilling to spend their time or their energy or their money on it, then it's not a priority. And what happens all the time in our lives, in any realm of our lives that matter, is that we stop investing our time and our energy and money into the things that we express to be our priorities. Does your marriage really matter to you? Oh, does it? Well, how is that reflected on how you spend your time, your energy, and your money? Your kids, your family, your faith? How is it reflected in how you are spending your time, your energy, and your money? Like we were talking about before, about being healthy, about taking care of yourself, about making sure you're capable of continuing to serve and love people because you are appropriately caring for yourself. How is that reflected in how you spend your time and your energy and your money? And what you might discover, either as a reassurance or maybe as a gut check, is that if you ask honest questions about how you're currently spending your time and your energy and your money, is that they might not reflect what you want to be your priorities at all. And I get that we all have to work, but maybe you find that your work is consuming you. And I'm not against leisure and entertainment, but it'd be really challenging to learn that that's your deepest priority. I'm not saying that we should never clean the house, but isn't it possible that some of you might be miscommunicating the importance of your relationships or even your own health because of the time and energy you're putting into chores or accomplishing something? I'm not here to tell you what your priorities should be. I think that's a decision you're going to have to really wrestle with. What I'm suggesting is that you test yourself to see if you're aiming at the wrong target. I worry that there's a lot of people that are going to figure out a little too late that they've hit a ton of bullseyes, but they were shooting at the wrong targets. And I want to pause for just a second here to talk to students, because the patterns of our lives don't spring up one day when we're an adult. They develop choice after choice after choice. Have you ever been to the airport and they have those like moving walkways? Life is like a moving walkway. There's no such thing as being stationary. We are all becoming someone. These questions, deciding what our priorities are, determining if we're moving toward them. It's a skill that I genuinely hope you'll get in you as early as possible so that you can step more and more into the adulthood that you are being called to be as God leads you forward. Now, an audit in and of itself doesn't change anything, right? But you can't change what you can't see. And this is about being able to see honestly and clearly, what are you investing in? What are your priorities? And if your priority is your faith in God, then that also needs to be deeply reflected in your time and your money and your energy. All right, next question. I'm struggling with loss and grief. Any ideas of what might help? This is a tough one. It requires a lot more of an explanation than this setting really allows. But one thing I'm going to recommend you consider is, how are you currently giving yourself permission to come face to face with what you're experiencing? The pain of loss and grief is intense. And a lot of people, the reaction is primarily to avoid it, to avoid thinking about it, to avoid feeling it, to avoid even looking at it. And one of the primary things that's a truth in life is that things that are ignored don't tend to get better. As hard as it is, how do we develop a deep sense of honesty when it comes to what we're thinking and feeling? One of the little words that can get in the way of this is the word should. That little word should, it is a massive challenge for a lot of people. What should I be thinking? What should I be feeling? What should my grief look like? And I'm not saying there can't be desired outcomes or desired emotional experiences, but what people can do sometimes is they pretend like they're experiencing what they should experience instead of being honest about what they're actually experiencing. Because there isn't a next step if you just beat yourself up over what you should be experiencing or where you should be. But if you can be honest with what you're experiencing, with what you're feeling, with what you're thinking, even if it's not the prettiest truth, if you can find that truth, then you can take a next step about what does it look like to deal with and to manage that truth. This is another place where journaling can be a really useful tool to give yourself the ability to take some of this inside stuff, whatever it is, whether it's a should or should not be, to take this inside stuff and honestly give yourself a chance to look it over. Write some of this stuff down. Write down some of what you're thinking, some of what you're feeling, then set it aside. And then take time, maybe the next day or maybe later that week, and then reread it. And see, can you honestly start developing this awareness of what am I thinking and what am I feeling? Another thought I'd ask you to consider is, how do you put yourself in a position to tell the stories of that person's life? Is there someone you can reminisce with? Can you write out their story? When someone's hurting, people don't always know how to ask good questions of that person. They don't want to upset them. And sometimes it can feel like you're not allowed to talk about the person you lost. I hope that you find a way to tell that story. Don't pretend like it's not there. Don't pretend like everything is fine. Don't just keep rolling and acting like everything's normal. Give yourself time to heal. Give yourself time to experience your pain. Give yourself time to slow down and become more aware of what you're feeling. Because you're experiencing that because the loss matters. The person or the relationship that was lost, it matters. And it hurts because it matters. Give yourself space to breathe. Write down some of this and be honest with what you're experiencing. All right, next question. I find myself getting frustrated and aggravated with my kids. How do I do better with that? And this is something that hits close to home because I completely understand what it's like to get frustrated with my kids. There's this book that came out a while ago, and it's not a great book to be honest with you, but there's this concept that came from it, which I think is fantastic. And part of what it talks about is how everyone's greatest weakness is actually a strength that's currently being mismanaged. There's not a single weakness that doesn't represent a strength. And so one of the exercises I'm going to encourage parents who might be wrestling with this is take 3 or 4 note cards. And on each note card, write one thing or one behavior that you find particularly frustrating or aggravating. Maybe a really specific kind of behavior. Then on the other side of the card, I'd like you to write down why that is a strength that's currently being mismanaged. So for example, maybe instead of hyper, they're spirited. Maybe instead of stubborn, they're determined. Maybe instead of emotional, they're self-aware. Maybe instead of combative, they're strong-willed. Maybe instead of being a smart aleck, they're quick-witted. Look, the reality is this is not about extinguishing the flame in the kid. It's about directing it so that kid can be as healthy as possible. Because the way we think about a thing, or the way we view it, the way we interpret it, it makes all the difference in how we react to it, doesn't it? If I walked past you and I stepped on your foot, it kind of matters whether you think I did it on purpose or not, doesn't it? If it was an accident and I was like, oh man, I'm sorry, my bad, we'd probably be okay. But if you think it was on purpose, if you think I stomped on your foot, you and I might have some conflict. So if your kid is a hyperactive troublemaker with a smart mouth, then you'll probably treat her that way. If she's a passionate, spirited kid with a strong will and a quick wit, well, then maybe you treat her that way too. In the bigger picture, and this is more general than just the emotional expression with the kids, is what does it look like with anger and frustration in general? And the one thing we all need to do is slow down. Again, another wonderful verse from the Bible in James. But everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Because the faster we move, the more likely we are to do it the way we've always done it. And if the ways we've always done it is to mismanage our frustration or mismanage our anger, or maybe even just mismanage the words we use when we're angry and frustrated, then slowing down is the next step. Imagine it this way. Imagine that you drive the exact same commute every day. Same road, same lights, same commute every day. And I don't know about you, but I've had commutes like that where it's the same commute every single day. And there's sometimes where I'll get to work and I'll be like, well, hope I didn't run a little old lady off the road because I do not remember driving here. My head must have been an autopilot. I have no recollection of driving here. I hope I didn't run any red lights or anything because I couldn't tell you. Now imagine the exact same road, exact same lights, it's the exact same commute, but now it's snowing. It's icy. Well, what do? Well, you slow down. You look around. You turn the radio off. You start thinking about what's coming up. You look at what the guy behind you doing. You look about that hill you have to climb next. Well, why? Because it's become more dangerous. And I would suggest that in our frustration and our anger, the road is icy. Be careful. Be slow. Take your time. Be slow to speak up. Be slow to flare up. And I don't know exactly what that includes for you. I don't know if that means going for a walk or maybe listening to some music or grabbing a cup of coffee or whatever. But if we do not view anger as a situation that is dangerous to our relationships, then we are speeding up on an icy road. I think we'll wrap it up here. Look, I really hope that this conversation has been helpful in some ways. I know life is challenging. I know it can be really difficult, and it takes a lot of work to hold on to hope along the way. But what I really want you to know is that you're not alone. There are people who care and who can help. And that's one of the very best things about a place like CCC is the people and not being alone. And if you're having a hard time, if life is rough, keep going. You're not alone. If you need help, please reach out for it. Keep coming back, keep logging in, keep showing up, keep putting yourself in position to be healthier and healthier. We'll see you next week.